I can't hear myself. Okay, there it is. We get to read Philippians 2, 3 through 5. All right, Philippians 2, 3 through 5. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility of mind, regard to one another as more important than yourselves. Do not merely look out for yourself, for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. Have this attitude in yourselves, which was also in Christ Jesus.
My son was at home yesterday, Tyler, and he said he went to the polishing the pulpit, him and Faith did, and he said that somebody down there said this is the week we all look forward to all year, and this is the week that gets us through to the next year when we come back again. And I said, man, I feel like I'm at a polishing the pulpit every time I come to services on Sunday. You know, I really do. It's that good. It's like I come together with all of you, and the encouragement I derive from that and hopefully give to that, and just worshiping God together. It feels like I'm at polishing the pulpit, you know. That's how I feel. And I guess if you have an environment like this, you know, you just always have everything you need. I'm sure many people gained a lot of insight and encouragement from that event nonetheless, but I just am thankful for what we have here at Sullivan Village. This morning's lesson, we're looking at these metaphors of what a Christian is, and you are an athlete. You might not realize that. Maybe you never even got involved in sports when you were growing up, or maybe you played a large role in sporting events. Maybe you played basketball, baseball, football, volleyball, golf, soccer, tennis, whatever. But in the Bible, through inspired writing, God wants you to see yourself as an athlete involved in some type of contest is really what we see in the Scriptures. Certainly, if you were to ask any Roman citizens in the first century, they were well familiar with the games. They had the Olympics, they had the Isthmian Games, and it was a big national event. Everybody knew about it. Those athletes that competed in those games, they were hailed high. They were almost even idolatrized by many individuals, not unlike what we see happening today. People have their idols. When I was growing up, it was Michael Jordan. He was, the idol for the NBA, and still to some extent he holds that position as being the iconic figure of that sport. Tiger Woods, these iconic, this is the craze of the culture. And by the way, with these metaphors, they're sort of useful in every generation. I don't know how far sports goes back, but it goes back a ways. Solomon made a reference to races, and we'll mention that in just a moment. But you draw on this popularity, the New Testament writers decided, through inspiration, of course, God decided to use that to give us a picture and to illustrate the importance of various aspects of our Christianity. So today, we have these catchphrases that are rooted in the context of athletics. We might say, no pain, no gain, right? Give it your best shot. If you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. Don't throw in the towel. We're familiar with phrases like that, and we could probably name more. In Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and verse 11, Solomon said, I again saw under the sun that the race is not given to the swift, and the battle is not to the warriors. Neither is bread to the wise, nor wealth to the discerning, nor favor to men of ability, for time and chance overtake them all. When I hear that the race is not given to the swift, do you know what comes to my mind? Aesop's Fables, the Tortoise and the Hare. You remember that? Those two guys were sitting there. I remember watching that when I was real little. They're on the starting line, the tortoise and the hare, and they take off. And boy, that Hare was quick. He zipped way up there. That Tortoise was just giving it everything he had, but he really wasn't going very fast. But he put his all into it. And that Hare, he got down there and he thought, I got this in the bag. And so he figured he could take him a nap over here, and he could kick back and lollygag over there. He could really just waste time because, after all, that Tortoise is never going to catch up. But it got the best of him because he, in his resting and lollygagging, that Tortoise, still giving it all his effort, went right on past him and ended up crossing the finish line first and won the race. We need to make sure, no matter what pace we're able to go at, that we're going with what we've got to go. And we're giving it the best that we've got to give. And so Paul even compared the Christian life to an athlete, primarily where we'll be focused this morning. He said things like, fight the good fight of faith, run with endurance. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, and use these types of phrases. His whole, all of his letters are sort of peppered with this illustration of sports. You know, his favorite one was the foot race. He refers to it more than any other, running the race. And so Paul, he liked sports. He was a sports fan. I imagine he probably saw a few of those games in his day. One observation from sports metaphors in the Bible that we need to make sure that we don't miss, that we pay very close attention to. It is extremely important for every Christian. There's no such thing in any of these metaphors, you won't find it, as a team sport. You're not on a relay. You're not on a four-man team where you can be the weak link and rely on your three strong counterpartners to just sort of get you the victory. You don't see that in these metaphors. Each and every competitor is going to win the prize based on their own merits. And the standard is the same for everyone. The judgment is impartial. Now, I know there's other metaphors that picture us in a body, the hand and the foot, and they're working together for the good of the whole under the oversight of the head. And we do see those team-type metaphors, but not this one. This one is, you are going to run your own race. Everyone must run their own race. And crowns will be won based on your own performance, not another. I want us to notice several aspects this morning about athletes that we will need if we're going to plan on winning the victor's crown. Why do we run the race, if we call it a race, or why are we competing as an athlete? We run the race to win. We don't run to just run it, right? We're not just on the track running the race just for our health. We're doing it to win. That's why we're doing this. We want to win this race. Turn with me to 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5. Our first point this morning, an athlete must be obedient. You're getting a double dose, I think, because Bible class was all about obedience. I thought Glenn was going to preach my sermon this morning, but he stayed away from this, so that's good. 2 Timothy 2:5 says, also, if anyone competes as an athlete, he does not win the prize unless he competes according to the rules. So first thing he says here is anyone. Anyone. He means this could apply to any person. Of course, we're talking about an athlete. If anyone's going to compete, this is a Christian. Any and every Christian. If you plan on winning a prize, the only way you get that prize is if you compete according to the rules. This is the only way. 1 John chapter 2, we've been looking at that on Tuesday night. Some of you I know have been studying along on your own online at home. And in 1 John chapter 2, verses 3 through 6, it says, by this we know that we have come to know Him, if we keep His commandments. That's what according to the rules means. If we're going to compete according to the rules, that's the rules. It's His commandments. He says, the one who says, I've come to know Him, and does not keep His commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever keeps His word, in him the love of God has truly been perfected. By this we know that we are in Him. The one who says he abides in Him ought himself to walk, or you might say run, in the same manner as He walked. We need to follow that pattern of Christ who obeyed His Father's commands. and He and the Father were one. Athletes knew that there was a strict nature to the games when they got involved. They knew that there was rules that had to be kept, and they knew the penalty for not competing according to the rules. They knew very clearly in the first century Olympic Games that you would end up disqualified. You would be cast out, you'd be publicly humiliated as a result, and you would not be able to win the prize. Paul knew of the danger of being disqualified, and this is why we read things like what he writes to the church in Philippi. Look at Philippians chapter 2. He's sort of giving them a heads up, warning them that yes, they could end up being disqualified for something such as this. We have to hold fast the word of life. That means hold on to the rules. Look at verse 14, Philippians 2:14. Do all things without grumbling or disputing. I think the New King James says, without complaining or arguing. So that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world, holding fast the word of life, so that in the day of Christ I will have reason to glory, because I did not run in vain nor toil in vain. Paul's seeing himself running, but he doesn't want to run in vain. It would really be all for nothing if those whom he set out to convert ended up defecting from the race themselves and were disqualified as a result. He says they have to hold fast the word of life. That means hold on to the rules. You see what kind of an infraction could disqualify you here? Grumbling or disputing, complaining, grumbling. Nothing's really ever good enough. I've always got some critical element to everything. You didn't say it just right. You didn't announce it just right. You didn't do it just right. You didn't do it my way. I didn't like it very much. You know what I'm going through? Let me tell you all about it. It's terrible. I can't stand it. I've had it up to here. Folks, that will disqualify you from getting a prize. You will not get a prize if you're habitually complaining, moaning, and groaning throughout your Christian life. God says right here it'll disqualify you, and Paul wanted them to know it clearly. We need to be careful that we don't fall into this. It's easy, especially with the way the world does things. They want to tell about all the things, and woe is me. It's not wrong to get prayer requests for things we're going through, and we can boast in our weaknesses, but we've got to be careful that it doesn't just become a constant looking for pity, throwing ourselves a party, always nitpicking every little thing everybody does, and just making people miserable. God will take those stumbling blocks out of His kingdom when He comes. Today, officials have to constantly be watching for athletes who are using performance-enhancing drugs, who are cheating. They're breaking the rules. You look up the name Rosie Ruiz. Cheated. 1980 Boston Marathon. Name lives on in infamy as a result of that. You know, the Greeks had a similar way of making public their competitors who cheated. They had them each carve a bronze statue to Zeus, and they would place it in the arena and put their name on it. When all the competitors would come out in the games that year, they had to run by all those statues. And you could see the shame of those names that lived on in that arena, reminding those current athletes not to do what they did previously. Rosie Ruiz. So Paul emphasized something else that's necessary to receive a crown. Number one, if we're going to receive a crown, we have to be obedient to the rules. We have to keep the commandments. You're not going to keep them perfectly. I'm not saying that. But you need to make sure when you do violate those rules, you find yourself getting outside of the rules that God has set. If our hearts are trained to discern good and evil, our consciences will be convicted when we're in violation, and we should, with a godly sorrow and a penitent heart, quickly get back. True Christians will do that. Number one, you need to be obedient if you're going to win a prize. Number two, an athlete must be self-controlled. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, you must be self-controlled. verse 24 through 27. Paul says, "Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. Everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. They then do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. Therefore I run in such a way as not without aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air, but I discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified." Notice, Paul begins this section of text with a rhetorical question. He already knows they know the answer to this, but he asks it anyway for emphasis. He says, "Do you not know?" Of course they know that those who run in a race all run, obviously, but only one receives the prize. Now, in the major games, there was only one prize. Second and third place might get honorable mention, but that was it. In the more local type games, from what I read this week, there were other prizes given out, but not in the main game. In the main games, it was one prize. That was it. Man, you might be on that starting line with a bunch of others. Only one of them is going to be victorious in the end. He says, here's the point. Run in such a way that you may win. Run in such a way. What way is that? How can I win? You know, there were great benefits from what I read this week. I didn't know this, but it's fascinating. I know they would give them a wreath, and they would be able to wear this wreath that they made. But there were benefits for the winning athlete. They were offered a tax-free living. They were given free meals at the city hall. They had the ability to marry whoever they chose, and they were welcomed as a hero with the city they lived in singing their praise. You can imagine the appeal to win was different for various ones. Some may have thought, man, I'm going to finally be off the strict diet and all this rigorous training, and I'm going to finally have some free meals and just eat to my heart's content. Maybe that was their motivation. I don't know. Some might have thought, you know what, I've always been wanting to marry that girl, and when I win, I'm going to marry her. And others might have thought, I'm not going to have to pay any taxes. Boy, I'm going to have a lot of extra money. And maybe they just thought, I can't wait till they're singing my praises. I can't wait till they think of me as the greatest. Whatever the motivation was, there was certainly rewards for winning those games. Athletes took it very seriously, and they desired to win above everything else. And they knew the competition was going to be tight. And so they did everything in their power to make sure that they would win. They ran in such a way so that they would win that race. We need to do the same. We cannot allow anything to hinder us, which is why we have to be self-controlled. If you're going to keep the rules, by the way, you need self-control. Oftentimes, it's our desires that get in the way of us keeping those rules. He says, all run, but one gets a prize. It reminds me of what Paul said, many walk in Ephesians. Many walk, of whom I tell you now and have told you, that are enemies of the cross of Christ. He tells you, even weeping, that they are enemies of the cross of Christ. There have been many that have started the Christian race and have left the faith. There have been many who have started the Christian race who have gotten tangled up in the sins of this world, or who have just thrown in the towel completely and turned their back on Christ. Many who have died and never come back. There have been many. You look at 1 Corinthians chapter 10, you remember they had all been baptized into Moses. They all ate and drank the same spiritual food and drink. But it says a couple verses after that with most of them, God was not well pleased. Today, how many have been baptized into Christ? And we all eat and drink the same spiritual food and drink. The unleavened bread, the fruit of the vine, representing the body and blood of our Lord. But with how many of us will God be well pleased? Will it be said that with most of us He is not well pleased? I pray not. Many start the race. How many will win the prize? Paul says in verse 25, everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. They then do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. You know that these athletes, they had to swear ahead of time, before running the race, that they had been training diligently and vigorously for 10 months. They had to swear that they had been diligently training for 10 months. Well, you don't have to do that today. No, there's no need to swear anything. What they have today is called a qualification. And so if you're going to compete in a race, well, you'll have to meet down at the track way before the Olympics, and they're going to have you run a qualifying time to see if you can meet the standard of qualification. If you don't meet that qualification standard, you can nip it in the bud. You're not going to the Olympics. You won't even be out there. You can't just get off your couch and say, I think I'm going to go to the Olympics today and get on TV. No, they won't get on TV. You have to make that qualifying time. They had to swear that they had been diligently, rigorously training for 10 months. Today, people have been training for 4 years. Some of them 8 years if they've been in the Olympics multiple times. They've been living this diligent, rigorous lifestyle. And so they are training their bodies. And what they would give up a lot of times, or they would train concerning their sleep schedule, the food that they were eating, the hours they spent training until they were tired and sore. They would do this, and they would avoid anything and everything that would hinder their progress. They simply just did not engage in it because they knew that that would compromise winning. And so they would get rid of it. They would get rid of it completely. All of this was for the temporary prize. And what about us? Our prize is not temporary. We are not talking about doing all of this so that we can win something that'll fade away or lose its luster or become, defiled, perishable. We're talking about imperishable, undefiled, will not fade away, reserved in heaven for you. Glorious inheritance. How much more should we be serious about training? Seriously training. When's the last time you read a whole book of the Bible in one setting? Some people are just read one verse a day. Or maybe they read, just a little tiny section every few days. Can that really get you by? Can you eat just a little piece of meat every day? We have to be consuming the Word. It has to dwell in us richly. We need to be consuming it. When's the last time you took a chapter of the Bible and just went through it and looked up every word in there that you didn't really have a good concept of? And just did a detailed study of that chapter? What kind of training are you doing? How hard are you pushing yourself? Are you striving to win? Fortifying your faith? What are we doing? This world lulls us. It gets us comfortable. We're just cruising along with the current, oftentimes. We cannot allow that to happen. Paul says in verse 26, therefore I run in such a way as not without aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air. Notice the phrase, in such a way. It's repeated twice. It was said back in 24. He said, run in such a way so that you may win. What is that way? Paul says, I'm running in such a way. I'm boxing in such a way as to win. Paul, how are you running? He says, not without aim. This is not the race for the casual runner who just wants to get on the track and sort of, get their headphones, their water bottle, and just sort of be out there for a little bit and do their thing. And, I'm just kind of casually kicking back, just kind of running my race. Everything's going to be good. That's not this kind of race. If that's your race, you're in the wrong one. This is a race for the diligent. This is a race for the competitor. This is a race for somebody who's got their eye on a gold medal in the Olympics. Serious training. Not without aim. Paul is running. He knows where he's running. He knows why he's running. He knows what he is running for, and he knows what it's going to take to get there. He's very, very focused on where he is going and what he is going to accomplish. Paul, how do you box? Paul says, not beating the air. Paul's not out there shadow boxing, beating the bag and all this. He doesn't have time for that. Paul is looking very closely at his opponent. He's waiting for the opportune moment, and he's about to deliver a knockout blow, Mike Tyson. That's what he's doing. And he's looking for that perfect moment. He's going to land that punch. He's going to knock it out. That's what he's after. Both of these illustrations point to us the fact that Paul is in the game to redeem the prize. He wants to win. He's not going to allow anything to stop him. You have to have self-control in order to win this. Paul finishes here saying, I discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I've preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified. That word there, discipline, it literally means to strike below the eye, to strike in the face, to give a black eye. If you follow what he's saying here, Paul, how do you box? I'm not beating the air, but I strike in the face. I'm not beating the air, I'm striking in the face. I'm going to knock him out. You learn who his enemy is. Who are you punching out here, Paul? His flesh. His flesh. He's going to knock his flesh out. That flesh will cause you to be disqualified, won't it? We've got to be controlling the flesh. Self-control means not allowing the flesh to do what it wants to do. He says, I knock it out and make it my slave. He's got full control over his body. That body is not going to run amok. That body is not going to have its desires. He's going to continue daily taking up his cross, denying himself, and following Christ. And so he knocks that flesh out. That's a very fascinating picture, isn't it? And he does this for one reason, so that he, after preaching to others, will not be disqualified. Disqualified? Paul, wait a minute. Paul, you think you could be disqualified? The Apostle Paul thought he could end up disqualified, yes. He had that in his mind that he could end up missing it. Man, if the Apostle Paul could become disqualified, he was an inspired apostle. He was the most evangelistic person I've ever heard of. And he could become disqualified? What about you and me? You could become disqualified for something as small as complaining and grumbling, let alone hypocrisy and a multiplicity of sins. Paul had to beat that body into submission. He did it daily. So an athlete must be obedient, an athlete must be self-controlled if they want to win the prize. And thirdly, an athlete must have endurance. Turn to Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12, an athlete must have endurance if they're going to win the prize. Hebrews 12, 1 through 3 says, Therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For consider him who has endured such hostility by sinners against himself, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Paul tells us we have a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us. He starts that with therefore. You know who those witnesses are? He's writing to, I say Paul. We don't know if it's Paul. It's the Hebrews writer. How about that? The Hebrews writer says there's a great cloud of witnesses surrounding us. He's just mentioned to these Jewish Christians a whole bunch of them that they would have been very familiar with. Not all of them, obviously, but a bunch of them in Hebrews chapter 11. You know what Hebrews chapter 11 really is? We call it the Hall of Faith. It's people who are winners. You're reading winners, people who won the prize. They've already won the prize. They're not fretting about this life anymore. They're not training and disciplining themselves and beating up the flesh anymore. They're not worried about any of that anymore. They have run the race. They have finished the course. They are done. They already got the prize. It's theirs. And that's the record of Hebrews chapter 11. He says, there they are, almost as if they're in the stands, cheering us on as we run our race. They're witnesses. And their testimony testifies to the fact that this can be done. You can do it. They've already done it. And their testimony is still cheering us onward, just like the blood of Abel. Though he's dead, it still speaks. He says, let us also lay aside every encumbrance and the sin which so easily entangles us. That phrase, let us also, means let us also do exactly what they had to do in order to win the prize. They all had to do the same thing. Same thing we've got to do. What do we have to do? We have to lay some things aside, don't we? If it's going to work out for us to run this marathon, you can't be carrying a bunch of weight. You'll never get to the finish line with it. You have to cast it off. You have to lay it aside. You know, even people running marathons today, they're wearing the thinnest material, and those shorts, those guys are wearing those shorts are not very long. They're very thin. Their little, shirts are very thin material. They've got that number on there, and they've got those lightweight running shoes, and they have basically, everything they can do to make it easier to run that long distance race. We need to lay aside every encumbrance. Encumbrances, they're not necessarily sinful things. These are just things that hinder you, things that you don't need, things that take up time, energy, and whatever else. It's like the thorny soil, right? Cares of the world, the worries, the riches, they choke us from ever bearing fruit or bringing it to maturity. We have to lay those things aside. It might be a thing in your life that you've always enjoyed, but you realize is just taking up too much time. It's a hindrance to me. It needs to go on the chopping block. And then, of course, the sin. Sin will hinder you. He says it easily entangles. I always think of a spider web when I think of this passage. You think of a little bug, if you've ever watched them hit that spider web before. I used to get them, and throw them in the spider web just to watch the process. And then, they start struggling, and they just get more tangled up in it. And of course, if the devil sees a Christian start getting tangled up in sin, he's just like the spider. He's not going to wait long. He's going to go right in there and try and get you wrapped up so tight so that you'll never get out of it. He does not want you to get out of it. He knows the deal. We need to avoid the sin. It easily entangles us. Hebrews 3:12 says the deceitfulness of sin. We need to be encouraging one another. Sin's deceitful, and it can harden us against God if we get involved in it. Accomplishing this requires strict training. Athletes trained in order to compete at the highest level, they had to develop stamina. And that took a series of difficulties and trials. An out-of-shape, flabby athlete would never win the prize. No way. 1 Timothy 4:7 and 8, he says, have nothing to do with worldly fables, fit only for old women. On the other hand, discipline yourself for the purpose of godliness, for bodily discipline is only of little profit, but godliness is profitable for all things, since it holds promise for the present life and also for the life to come. He doesn't say that physical discipline in your body is not worth anything. It's worth little, not because it doesn't do you much good while you're in this life. It does you a lot of good in this life, but it's only good for this life. It is profitable, only temporarily. In comparison with the profitability of godliness, oh man, that's going to profit you for eternity. That word discipline there, it literally meant to exercise in the nude. Don't ask me why, but that's the way they did it. In those gymnasiums, those athletes would strip everything off so nothing would impede their training. That was the ancient times training regiments. And likewise, every Christian needs to strip themselves of every encumbrance and every sin that entangles them and keeps them from competing and growing spiritually and finishing strong. He says here, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, looking to His example. When you look to Jesus, what is it we learn from His example that we can profit from? Well, we see here that He endured the cross. He had a joy awaiting Him. He knew there was a glorious family reunion up ahead, exultation. And it says He endured the cross, despising the shame, and He sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. And in verse 3, it says He endured hostility by sinners against Himself. Whatever Jesus faced, He got through it. He continued to lean on God. He did it through prayer. He did it through continuing to trust the one who judges righteously. And He never sought any vengeance. He never lashed out in anger, not unrighteous anger. He never did anything sinful. He never threatened anybody. He never returned insult for insult, blow for blow. He trusted God. And we look to His example. Remember the endurance of Paul. Look at Philippians chapter 3. Philippians chapter 3, Paul He says there in verse 12 through 15, not that I've already obtained it or have already become perfect, but I press on so that I may lay hold of that for which I was laid hold of by Christ Jesus. Brethren, I do not regard myself as having laid hold of it yet, but one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and reaching forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal, for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. Let us therefore, as many as are perfect, have this attitude, and if in anything you have a different attitude, God will reveal that also to you. However, let us keep living by that same standard to which we have attained. Did Paul know about endurance? He said, I'm not there yet. Notice he uses the term press on, press on. I press on. You know, when you're in this race, you've got to forget those things that are behind. They can slow you down. You're looking over your shoulder at what's going on back there, trying to focus on the past. You're going to end up straying off the trail. You know, for some people, forgetting what's behind means forgetting the failures in your life. For some people, it means forgetting the trophies and the successes and all that you once were, how great you were, how many trophies, how many accomplishments. Paul had both things, didn't he? The nightmare of reliving, having put Christians to death and in prison, he had to forget about that. He's not that man anymore. But then in this context specifically, all the accomplishments that he had going for him in the flesh, if anybody can boast in the flesh, he says, I'll top the charts. Here's a list. Here's a pedigree. You want my resume? Here it is. Try to top it. You can't do it. He says, I'm forgetting all of that. Forget about all of that. Yeah, I was somebody, but you know what? Who cares about it? All I care about now is pressing forward. One thing I do, I'm reaching forward that I may attain the prize and be with Christ. That's what he wanted, to know Christ, the fellowship of his sufferings and his resurrection. Paul knew about that. If you're going to be an athlete and win the prize, you've got to have endurance. You can't allow anything to slow you down and keep you from finishing the race or throwing in the towel. You've got to keep on running, no matter how difficult it gets. Fixing your eyes on Jesus, who is at the finish line, saying, don't give up. Get back up if you're down and keep on coming. He wants you to finish. He's your trailblazer. And lastly, an athlete must finish the course. Look at 2 Timothy 4. You knew we were going to have to put this one in there. 2 Timothy chapter 4. You can't have an athletic sermon without this one. 2 Timothy 4, 6 through 8 says, for I'm already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. In the future there's laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. Not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. You know what? Paul's not asking Timothy to do anything that he hasn't already done himself. He's telling Timothy to do the same. You know, you see here this valiant runner, the Apostle Paul, coming up over the final hill. And he's coming down that final home stretch. He can see the finish line. And as he gets closer to that finish line, he's calling out to Timothy, and he's telling Timothy to do the same. Make sure you fulfill your ministry. Be faithful. Fight the good fight. Finish the course. His young son in the faith, his faithful assistant in the gospel. And now it's up to Timothy to run obediently with self-control and endurance and finish his course. Paul says, I'm already being poured out as a drink offering. This isn't just some general reference to a sacrifice, some typology that Paul just pulled out of the hat from the Old Testament off the cuff. No, this is much more specific, very precise. He's talking about the drink offering, which was the libation. If you know anything about offerings, after the burnt offering was offered, the very end, which would close out the ceremony of the offering, would be when they would pour out the drink offering. That libation of wine would be poured out next to the altar, and it finished the sacrifice. Paul says, I'm already being poured out. His sentence has already been passed down. He's sitting on death row in prison in Rome, waiting until, who knows how long, until the Roman Empire gets around to taking his head off. He thought he might have had another season left. He tells Timothy, hurry, come before winter. Hurry. It's your last chance to see me. I want to say some things to you. He says here, I've fought the good fight. I've finished the course. I've kept the faith. That fought the good fight, we might think he's mixing boxing with running here once again, but it's not the case. It's really just a running metaphor that he's using here. That fought, the word I fought is agonizomai. It literally means I've agonized. I've competed in agony and struggled and strained and striven. Have fought the good fight. The word fight is the exact same word in Hebrews 12 for race. You're running the race. He says, I have striven, agonized this good competition, this good race. And then he says, I have finished the course. I've been running with everything I've got. I'm giving it my all. I have been giving it my all. My whole life has been a sacrifice, and now I'm about to be poured out. It's about to finish it off, and I'm about to finish this course completely. I have kept the faith, which means I've competed according to the rules. And he says that there's going to be a crown of righteousness. Who's going to award that to him? He says it's the righteous judge. The Lord will give him that, which is a picture of his reward for eternal life. Enter in, thou good and faithful servant, into the joy of your master. That's what he's going to get. James said, blessed is the man who perseveres under trial. Once he's been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. Jesus said in Revelation 2:10, be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. Matthew 24:13, the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. This is the glory of heaven that's on the line. You'll be ushered into the glories of heaven, never to worry about the cares and the worries and the pains of this life ever again. But don't get comfortable yet. We've got to continue striving, pressing on, forgetting what is behind. What about you as a Christian? God has given us this great picture, this image of being an athlete. If you love sports at all, you probably appreciate it. I like sports. I do appreciate this metaphor. It resonates with me. You can't be the weak link in a strong team. You may not have a lot to offer. You may not have a lot of strength physically. But you can't be somebody who just thinks that just because I'm with a bunch of strong Christians, I'm going to heaven. You have to become that strong Christian yourself. Studying, praying, continuing to pursue seeking God. It's each one of our obligation to do that. And God will strengthen you as you put those things into practice. If you're going to win the prize, you need to be obedient. You need to be self-controlled. You need to endure trials, hardships, persecutions, and the like. And you need to make sure you finish the course having kept the faith. You know, many athletes start this race and end up disqualified. Many athletes become Christians. They're baptized into Christ. They start running. They're like that hare. They take off. There's so much joy involved. They look like this is going to be an exciting time. And somewhere along the line, sin gets involved and they end up derailed. We need to be careful. There's a lot of dangers and pitfalls, and part of maturing as a Christian means recognizing those pitfalls, knowing our enemy, and having the wherewithal to withstand him, the armor, to mix metaphors of soldiers in the Lord's army. Maybe you are not where you need to be as an athlete. You're not competing according to the rules, and you're in jeopardy of being disqualified. And you need to appeal to the mercy of the judge this morning. He can put you back on the track and get you going again. If you've never started this race and you're ready to become an athlete and be an Olympian in the Lord's games, as it were, you can win the gold by keeping your eyes fixed on Jesus and doing the things that he has commanded. If you need to obey the gospel this morning, or you need to ask for forgiveness of some sin, get it off your chest and start again, or just to ask for the prayers of the church, we invite you to come forward as we stand and sing.